Welcome to today's lesson, family. This morning, we're dealing with Isaiah 53 and the correct interpretation. The credibility of this interpretation seems to be subjective based on which religion you follow, as Jews and Hebrews see it as a symbolic interpretation of the nation of Israel rising above oppression, while Christians see it as a prophecy about the events surrounding Jesus' life and crucifixion. If you're smart, you know it can only be one proper interpretation, and that's the one that the author intended for the reader to understand. We also have to take into account that this is an Old Testament book, so it's not going to benefit anyone who's not living around the time of Isaiah to relate to his vision. So we're going to read the chapter in context so we can make an educated conclusion on who Isaiah 53 is actually referring to. But first, we're going to go to the root of the Christian belief and pinpoint how this idea started to spread. We have to go to the book of Acts, chapter 8, verses 26 through 40. This is where the Nubian eunuch meets Philip in Gaza on his way to Jerusalem as he's leaving Egypt, and Philip sees him sitting on a chariot trying to interpret the book of Isaiah. Philip goes over and asks him, does he understand the book? When the eunuch says no, Philip gives him his own personal interpretation and starts preaching about Jesus. So it's fair to say that this is evidence of secondhand interpretation. Philip is telling someone who's uneducated how to view something, when we all should know that the book of Isaiah was written in pro se allegory. So a person not familiar with Jewish literature or culture could not understand. This is why Jesus said he spoke in allegory, because his message was only perceivable by other Jews. But that's another subject for another time. But let's always remember that these prophetic visions always represented things symbolically as opposed to literally. Isaiah is speaking allegorically about a servant, like when it says, he came up like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or comeliness, despised and rejected of men. That's not a description of Jesus. Jesus did not have a hard upbringing. He had comeliness and he was never rejected. Go back to Isaiah chapter 42. It clearly starts off by saying, my servant, I will support him, my chosen one who my soul desires. So we have to take into account that this whole portion is speaking on the servant, not just one verse. So it's sophistry to start in chapter 53 and skip the previous chapters and verses for context. Chapter 44 verse 1 says, Jacob my servant, Israel whom I have chosen. Even chapter 45 says God used Cyrus the Great as a shepherd and liberator of Israel, so it's impossible to be about Jesus. Even the church father Origen, who lived in the 3rd century AD, admitted in his writings that the Jewish people held that Isaiah 53 was about Israel. So this isn't something I'm making up. I just came to the same conclusion by reading the Old Testament in the proper context. The New Testament is notorious for taking things in the Old Testament way out of context to support their own doctrines, and this one is no exception. Cello the Great.